This is my video presentation for my science fair project this year, We Can't All Live on Everest Part 2. In the background, you can see my trifold from my project last year, We Can't All Live on Everest. And in the foreground, you can see the dry ice machine that I used in my last project and the model that I used for this project. Before I tell you more about my project, you need to know why I'm doing this. So in the past 36 years, sea levels have risen 10 inches. The water levels are rising by 1.7 millimeters a year, but will speed up if we don't do anything. As well as the ice caps melting and adding more water to the oceans, global warming is causing ocean temperatures to rise, which makes the water expand and take up more space. I chose to focus on just the melting land ice over the melting sea ice because if the sea ice melts, it's already displacing the water, so it doesn't make much of a difference to the sea level. I proved this by putting an ice cube in a glass of water. However, if the land ice melts, it adds more water to the oceans, and if sea levels continue to rise, habitats for fish, birds, and plants will be lost, as well as habitats for all those lovely Arctic and Antarctic animals. Another reason why this is really, really bad is because 71% of the Earth is covered in water, 3% of all that water is freshwater, and 10% of the world is covered in ice. 70% of all fresh water in the world is frozen. So if too much ice melts, it will add too much fresh water to the oceans. If you've seen Day After Tomorrow, you'll know why this is bad. But if you haven't, I'll tell you why. Adding too much fresh water to the oceans disrupts the balance between salt water and fresh water in the oceans, which affects the currents and the weather around the world. Just a little recap. Last year, my project was called We Can't All Live on Everest, which unfortunately I did not get to present due to COVID, in which I tested different ways to prevent the ice caps from melting. I looked at using insulation in the form of covering tiny areas with an insulator or reflective material. In the testing, I used tinfoil. My second idea was to make fake clouds to help block the sun and potentially create more snow. My third idea, which came out on top, was using dry ice. I believe it worked the best because it created a cold fog across the ice which cooled it and insulated it. After all of my research from last year made me wonder, could I create a way to take CO2 from the atmosphere and turn it into dry ice to help cool the ice caps? This led to my project this year in which I explore this process. I started my process by reviewing my data and information from last year. I then started to look into some research, and while researching, I was adapting my ideas of how I believed this machine would look and work. My first idea was to build a really tall tower that had a mechanism at the top that would take in carbon dioxide, transport it to the bottom of the tower, where it would then be compressed into solid CO2. After further research, I came across direct air capture, which I had not been aware of its existence previously. I then redesigned my idea to model how the direct air capture works. However, instead of the CO2 being buried underground or turned into fuel or sold to food and beverage companies, it would be transported to a separate building in which it will be cooled and compressed into solid carbon dioxide. After my research, I started to think of designs for my project. I began by building my ideas out of Lego. Once I had a handle on what I wanted it to look like, I began to construct my model. This is how my system works. This is the model that I created to show how my facility and systems will work. The first thing that happens is a fan takes in air from the atmosphere. That air then goes through a filter which has amine poured onto it. Only the carbon dioxide will stick to the amine, making the amine a good material to use. You can use other materials, but I chose to use amine. The amine-rich carbon dioxide solution then falls out the bottom and is pumped into a pellet reactor. Inside the pellet reactor, the amine-rich carbon dioxide solution is superheated and the amine is separated and reused, where the carbon dioxide goes through a few purification processes and then is transported into a separate building in which it is subcooled and injected into liquefied and injected into a holding tank, in which it is compressed at a temperature of negative 109 degrees Fahrenheit, which turns it into solid carbon dioxide. It then travels all the way from here to this tube here. In an actual one, there would be more than just one. And from then, it sublimates and flows all over the ice, cooling it. That is how my system will work. After all my research and thinking, this is how efficient I believe it will be, the cost and a few drawbacks and fixes for those drawbacks. Following my research, I believe that turning carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into dry ice will work. I think that the one huge upside is that it's reusing carbon dioxide instead of making more. Another upside is that the direct air capture is easily scalable, meaning you can scale it up and add even more fans. The initial cost of building the facility will be very high and will have a temporary impact on the environment due to traffic and activity. With the right sensors and monitoring systems, the operating costs should be lower and will decrease as technology improves. One of the larger problems with dispensing mass amounts of carbon dioxide is it could end up harming Arctic life by suffocation and/or too much carbon dioxide. My fix for this problem is simple. Just build a few large greenhouses to grow trees in that would have a small direct air capture mechanism that would take in extra carbon dioxide and feed it to the trees. This is an extra bonus because it helps get rid of even more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I would like to thank my father for his help in creating the model and my mother for helping with the video and tech side. Thank you to my teachers, Mrs. Saville and Mr. Ryan, for answering questions and guidance. And finally, to anyone who helped provide information that I was able to access for my project. Thank you for listening to my video presentation for my project this year, We Can't All Live on Everest Part 2.